Good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar on red clover, best practice, trial results and farmer experiences. My name is Jason Rankin and I am Strategy Manager at AgriSearch. AgriSearch is an independent farmer-led body. Our purpose is to drive farm profitability and sustainability through science, research and innovation. We are to equip farmers through the application of science, research and innovation to make a difference for the rural economy, environment and society, and our strategy is to apply knowledge, network and capabilities and to work with others to turn scientific possibilities into sound farm practice. To do this, we place a very strong emphasis on farm research and innovation. So why undertake this project? High quality silage, as I don't need to tell any of you, is of great importance to livestock farmers. There has been a lot of volatility and increased cost of manufactured fertilisers. And fertiliser use accounts for roughly 20% of greenhouse gas emissions on Northern Ireland livestock farms. Previous plot and field studies at AFBI Hillsborough have shown that red clover-based swards can give very high dry matter yields with no nitrogen fertiliser. However, there has been a low uptake of this on commercial farms, particularly in the west of the province. 12 farms were selected as part of this project to trial red clover-based swards. Swards were established on 10 of the farms during 2023, and tonight's webinar will report on the first full year of monitoring. The project will continue monitoring these swards for at least another 2 years. Before we start, just a few housekeeping points. You are automatically muted. Use the Q&A function on your screen and not the chat box to ask questions. Upvote questions you want answered. If you have any issues, usually you find that leaving and rejoining will fix them. The webinar, as you will note, is being recorded and will be available at a later date on the AgriSearch YouTube channel. And as always, please do complete the feedback survey at the end. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker this evening, Dr. David Patterson, Grassland Agronomist at AFBI Hillsborough, who will speak about the key steps to successfully establishing red clover silage and the first year of on-farm results. So, David, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jason, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'll just start off with a couple of thank yous. First of all, thanks a lot, really, to all the participating farmers in the project for sticking with it. It's been, I think you'll all agree, a challenging year 2 years ago and last year for establishing the swards and managing them. So big thank you for you all sticking with it, and another thanks to Courtney, who's in the AgriSearch team, who's done a massive amount of work gathering up all the samples and the data for this project. So tonight I want to just cover two things, some points on establishment of red clover, and second of all, just dig into some of the first year on-farm results. It is just the first year. It's very much the first look at how these swards are performing, and we will see how it goes. Okay. Jason has already covered some of this background, but just to emphasize, yeah, there is and there will be increasing pressure to reduce our carbon footprint on our farms. And one way of reducing nitrous oxide emissions is to reduce the amount of nitrogen fertiliser applied, hence the interest in this project. And also there's been that erratic cost of fertiliser. We can all think back to the 3 years ago whenever the war started, with the impact that had. It sent a tremor through the fertiliser industry and the pricing went haywire. Things have settled down a bit, but you know, even over this last week or two, we can all see on our screens the evidence of political turmoil, and we just never know what's around the corner. Getting back down to the project, we wanted to investigate how lower nitrogen options could work for silage production, namely using red clover. And again, as Jason has said, the last point there's been decades of really good research done at plot level and at system level, but largely on research establishments, north and south of the border and across in England, Scotland, over those years, but relatively little limited on-farm experience with growing or establishing growing and utilizing red clover on local farms here. So that's why this project was kind of conceived to gather a good geographic spread and farming type across Northern Ireland to have a go with red clover. Okay. That's just an illustration of one of the pieces of research. There was a plot trial done here at Hillsborough, primarily looking at different rates of slurry, but a side shoot result from the trial shows that the red clover, those sort of orangey bars on the screen, first year, second year, the red clover swards were out yielding the grass only swards in comparison. And that lasted at least for the first 2 years, and then a little bit less in year 3 and year 4. So there was really good positive messages coming from those research trials. Okay. So what this project is trying to do is, first of all, the photograph on the left is trying to establish the swards, and that has been challenging. And then second of all, manage it in such a way as to end up with good quality, high value silage on the photograph on the right. And you can see there the what I'm holding on to is some of those well-preserved large red clover leaves, which come out quite black. As soon as you cut red clover in the field, the large leaves start to go from green to brown, and then in the silage, if it's well preserved, well made, well preserved, they should end up quite black. And that's what you're trying to achieve, is not lose an awful lot of those trifoliate, large trifoliate red clover leaves and get them preserved in the silage. There's a lot of loss can occur even at the harvesting and the tedding and the gathering up and so on. So that's our objective, because that's where all the high quality nutrients and the protein is contained in those leaves. Okay. So just a few points on establishment. It'll be interesting to hear from the farmers how they what their experience is, and from Robert at Caffrey. But I just want to list out a few points for maybe people listening in who are considering having a go with red clover this spring, or are relatively new to the use of red clover. You must have a sward kill to start off with, and then some degree of cultivation at or near the surface. Ground doesn't need to be ploughed unless there's a really good reason for it. It's quite good enough to have some form of surface cultivation with discs, or a shallow pass with power harrow. Any which way to get a tilth created, a good clean tilth, and then surface seed into that with one of the Einbach type machines that are out there. So you're aiming for that fine, firm, fertile seed bed. Fertile reference there is, if you're coming out of maybe a break crop or a couple of years of cereals, obviously the fertility will be lower. If you're going grass to grass, there will be ample amount of nutrients in the seed bed coming from the previous crop. A real emphasis here on do not sow the red clover seeds too deep. If they go deeper than 10 mil into that surface crumble of the seed bed, they'll basically, they might germinate down there, but they will probably not get up and get established. Seed size is about 3 times the size of white clover. It's a bit of an academic point because they're still very, very small. So you can first of all, distribute them poorly across the field if your system isn't good, and as I said, can bury them too deep. It's less suited to stitching in than white clover, and that's really just it's nothing to do with the seeds being fundamentally that much different apart from size. It's the distribution. The red clover will grow where it is dropped, whereas the white clover, once it gets established, can actually start to spread laterally through the sward. So if your distribution is not good, either leaving it in lines or leaving it in patches, or too heavy on one side of the field and too light on the other, it'll stay that way, unfortunately, with red clover. It's less tolerant, there's good research to back this up, less tolerant of fertiliser nitrogen than white clover. And that's something to watch as well. the farmers involved, you'll hear from them later, but it's sort of a transition, maybe trying to wean off the use of fertilizer, nitrogen, and avoiding that temptation. You need warm soil temperatures, 8 degrees C, and that usually occurs depending where you are in the country and what altitude you're at, maybe around late April to early May, some years, before you get those soil temperatures, which will be required not only for germination, but also for really kickstarting a good flush of growth of clover in the first place. Mixtures, seed mixtures, if you're going for a grass red mixture, such as we've used in this particular study, it's in terms of kgs per acre, it's about 8 or 9 kilos of grass and 4 kilos of red. It's a bit of an error in this slide. We should have had and 1 kilo of white clover, because what the farmers actually sowed was grass, red and white. The white clover's in there is a bit of insurance in that once the red clover maybe peters out after perhaps 3, 4, 5 years, you've still got a body of white clover across the sward. If you're sowing monocultures, it would be, you'd up the rate, it's about 6 kilos per acre. In terms of companion grasses, typically hybrids and tetraploid perennial ryegrasses, they're still the best for timing of cuts and everything else in terms of compatibility with the red clover. Last point is a huge point. We must get the pH up to about 6.5. And there's no point skirting around this. You need to get the lime on well before, or even at the seedbed stage, just to make sure that clover gets just off to the best possible start. And it's not just for, you always think of liming in terms of improving the soil pH, but it actually encourages the little nodules that fix the nitrogen on the roots of the red clover plants. So you're actually doing a huge benefit for nitrogen fixation by getting the pH up in the first place. Okay. And in terms of weed control, it's a topical issue with these swards and some fairly limited options. In an ideal world, you'd have very clean ground coming into a reseed with red clover grass. And that the emphasis there is using all of the available, if you have a dock problem in your farm, or chickweed, or both. It's about trying to clean the ground as much as possible whenever you've got a grass sward. Or maybe if you do a break with a land rotation, to try and clean the docks that way. There's a limited number of herbicides available when you start to actually establish a red clover sward. There's a new product on the market just released this spring called Pro Clover. It's very good, but unfortunately it's only safe on red clover after it goes through its first winter. So unfortunately, those seedling docks and so on that might appear in the summer reseed, there's not any particularly good chemical option for cleaning those. Pro Clover, just back to it for a second, very good on chickweed and docks and a range of other weeds, but it doesn't take out nettles and thistles. And another proviso with it, you need 8 degrees soil temperature, and weeds must be in the pre-flowering stage. But whatever chemicals are available now or in the future, it's always a matter of reading the label very carefully to check for timing and for safety on red clover, either in its first seeding year, or in established crops. Chickweed and annual weeds and reseeds can be culturally controlled. It's not all about herbicides with what I call a fast graze. So a lot of mouths, not too large hooves, on for a short spell, maybe a week or two at the most, to clean up a lot of those annual weeds. And there's still alternatives such as spot spraying, not too popular, but it's still there. Okay. Getting on to the results, because I know time's moving on. These are the first year results from across some of the farms that are involved in the project from 2024. You can see there the black bar to the left-hand side, the range of dates of first cut across the different farms, across the sites, from about the 8th to the 30th of May for first cut. Second cut, 10th of June through to about 30th of July, quite a spread there. And again, another spread, third cuts came in around the 17th of July to about 28th of August. But you can see there in terms of first year yield, you all remember 2024 spring, we waited and waited for growth. And you can see the grass and the red clover swards behaved similarly in terms of performance, but relatively low yields, barely 3.5 tons of dry matter at first cut. Second cut, again, the red clover swards and the grass swards. And I should point out, on each of the farms, the farmer had a control field, if you want to call it that, which is basically one of his recent ryegrass or grass-only swards fertilized conventionally. So that was slurry and fertilizer nutrients. On the red clover, what we were encouraging folks to do was basically stick with slurry only. So, and then the third cut, again, there's maybe no surprise there, the red clover swards were significantly higher yielding. It's not a dramatic numeric difference, but significantly higher. And as you probably remember, clover generally across all swards was really starting to pick up and perform very, very well through July, late July into August and into September of last year. And that's reflected in the bar there at third cut. So basically the take-home message on that slide is that despite a not great year for grass generally in 2024, the red clover swards were holding their own, I think, very well in comparison with the fertilized grass-only swards on each of the farms. Okay. And then we gathered in and pulled together all of the fertilizer and slurry nitrogen that was used on the swards. So these numbers in the table at the top reflect available nitrogen from fertilizer plus available nitrogen from slurry when we calculated that in. So you can see there at first cut, the grass swards, these are averages from the farms that we got records from. First cut, the grass was receiving about 85, the red clover 37. Second cut, grass received about 80, the red clover 24. And over the whole season, because different farms had different numbers of cuts, but when we brought it all together for a number of the farms, grass received approximately 216 versus red clover only receiving 95. And the majority of that 95 of nitrogen would have been from slurry, and the majority. So the factor there is, you saw the yield chart just a moment ago where there was relatively little difference at first cut and second cut. But the nitrogen difference is quite dramatic there. Almost 2.5 times as much nitrogen going on to the grass swards. So, the difference there is largely due to the nitrogen fixation, that free nitrogen that we talk about, that the red clover produces and transfers to the grass, and also some mineralized nitrogen as well in that equation. So that just brings home the difference in the nitrogen used to create similar overall yields. Okay. And just to try and break that into a bit of a worked example, these numbers are based on a couple of the farms that we had some data from. The green bars going across the top of the slide, you can see there for the grass management. At first cut, it was slurry and quite a bit of fertilizer. Second cut, slurry and fertilizer. Third cut, similar story. And what that supplies is about 257 kilograms of nitrogen, 100 kgs of phosphate, and 265 kgs of potash. And if you drop down to the red bars, red blocks at the bottom for the red clover fields, which were largely on slurry only, 3,000 gallons before first cut, 1,000 gallons second cut, 2.5 third cut. And that was supplying, you convert the numbers, about 76 kilograms of nitrogen in total. So the slurry will obviously supply quite a bit of nitrogen. Not that the red clover needs it, but there you go. It'll feed the grass component of the sward. And the available phosphate 87 and available potash 167. And then the third red box to the right-hand side is just a standard crop requirement for the sward. And you can see there for a red clover type sward, it doesn't actually require any added nitrogen. The phosphate is more or less in balance. If it was a 2+ field, index 2+ soil test, that is, that's requiring about 90 kgs of phosphate, and we'd supplied 87, and requires 200 of potash, and we had supplied 167. So all that really tells you is that even with just applying slurry, we're applying maybe a little bit more nitrogen than we need. We're spot on for the phosphate and a little bit undersupplied for potash. So if anything, all that could be improved upon is by adding in maybe a single application at some point in the season of straight potash. Okay. In terms of quality, what Courtney was doing with the farmers was gathering up pre-harvest samples. So these quality analyses that you see in front of you are taken from the standing crops, just maybe 2 or 3 days before harvest, or maybe even the morning of the contractor coming in. The dry matter chart there, you can see, and this is across a number of farms, as I keep saying, dry matter at first cut was significantly lower in the red clover. And that's, I think, an important point to stress. It actually turned around at second cut. As you can see there, it was significantly higher than the grass swards and a little bit lower again at third cut. And I would have expected it to be lower at third cut with the wealth of clover in the sward and the sappiness of it. But the one to watch there is at first cut, and it really emphasizes for me and hopefully for everyone else, the importance of that fast wilt that you must get because of that lower dry matter in the standing crop to try and get a high dry matter silage. The energy charts over on the right-hand side, the gross energy as a wet chemistry analysis and the DOMD as a predicted NAIRS value on the bottom chart. But what you're seeing there is that overall, if you just sort of glance across those two charts, the red clover bars are not always significantly, but usually just a little bit numerically lower digestibility and energy value than the grass-only swards. And that's there's nothing new about that. Lots of trials and research has shown that over the years. And the assurance is that it's usually compensated with higher intakes and some of the nutrients, namely the lipid material, for example, with the PPO enzyme in the red clover, it's usually a little bit better protected as it goes through not only the ensilage process, but a little bit better protected when it goes through the rumen as well, and makes the nutrients that bit more available. So there's swings and roundabouts there, but slightly lower in terms of energy value. Okay. And crude protein is an important one here. You can see at first cut, yeah, we know there wasn't much growth at first cut, and it was a poor spring, early summer in 2024. But the proteins would reflect that. There wasn't even much sunlight, if you can remember. You need sunlight to build protein, and that's in those large trifoliate leaves. So 13–14%, slightly lower in the red clover, but not significant. And again, at cut 2, the protein contents are building as the weather improves, photosynthesis, etc. And you can see there we're up to about 15. And it wasn't until the third cut that we get into what you might expect crude protein of both grass and clover swards to achieve. You're up into that 18, almost 19% crude protein, which is consoling that once the weather did improve and the crop improved, that we were getting up into good values of protein. The flip side on the right-hand side is the fiber levels. And you can see there that as the season went on from first cut to second cut to third cut, generally, and this is classic textbook stuff here, the fiber levels will fall as you go from spring to autumn. But interestingly, the fiber levels are consistently lower, and significantly so, at first, second, and third cut for the red clover crops. which is, again, a key characteristic. NDF, if anybody's unsure, that's basically the cell wall material. Okay, all of the other digestible nutrients are the cell contents. The cell wall is those harder structural materials like cellulose and lignin, hemicellulose and pectin, which give the hard fiber component to the sward. Okay. Now, with very few silage samples in and analysed for the timing of this webinar, and we have a few more to collect and analyse. But for those that we do have, and these aren't all first cuts, there's a bit of a range. You can see there the dry matters. Despite the topsy-turvy weather that we had in 2024, I think the farmers did pretty well, getting an average of 25 to 32% in the silage. After a fast wilt, etc., etc. pHs, very good, 4 to 4.2. Crude protein, 10 to 16. If it had all been that third cut material, it probably would have been higher. MEs are very respectable. Again, you wouldn't expect the predicted ME to be as high as you would for a really good grass, well-managed grass sward. But having said that, I think those are pretty respectable, 10.8 to 11.9. Ammonia levels, good preservations again. Anything in single figures is usually good for ammonia. And ash, again, quite normal in those close to being in single figures is a good thing for ash. And just some tips there. I won't go through these all in detail. Maybe the most important one there, there's a lot of controversy about mowing height. I wouldn't get too precious about this for red clover because it's got the growing points down at the ground surface. I think that the main thing is work with your contractor. Just don't scalp the ground. Okay, because even at normal cutting heights of 5 to 6 centimeters, when everything's set right and the ground's level, and conditions are reasonable, the 5 to 6 centimeters would be perfectly fine for preserving the red clover. And the bottom point there is probably worth emphasizing. If you have to TED, just TED once and do it gently, and try and be gentle with the rake when you're gathering up as well. It's a fast wilt, far more important than thinking too much about D-value is just watching the weather window. And if you see that 1 or 2 days ahead of you that there's a good promise of sunshine, that's the time to react and get it cut and gathered in within 2 days, just to minimize that leaf loss, because that's where all the nutrients are. Okay, thanks. Maybe one more slide. Yeah, just to sum up, I think it's very promising what the farmers have done in the project so far. The red clover yields are holding their own against grass. Just a couple of challenging years so far, especially when you consider those fertiliser figures in terms of the nitrogen being applied to the control fields and overall similar herbage quality. So good news so far. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you very much, David, for that talk. Just a reminder that you can put in questions in the Q&A box at any point on the time. So next up, 2 of our ZeroNsile farmers are going to outline their experiences in establishing and managing red clover silage swards. First up is Francis McDonald, who is a dairy farmer from Dromore, County Tyrone. So Frank, over to you.
Thanks, Jason. Well, I suppose I should sort of give a wee bit of background to our own farm. We started into dairy farming in 2018. We moved over from suckler cows and we're milking about somewhere between 50 and 60. Our soil is quite heavy clay running into moss like most of Tyrone. The picture you'll see on the right-hand side is basically showing the impact of where the slurry was put and where the slurry wasn't put. That was at the border of the field. So it just shows you the impact that it was having. I didn't know anything about sowing clover, and so I was very reliant on the team, and I was very glad of their help because we would usually reseed probably about 10 acres ourselves every year with our own gear, but we weren't really set up for clover. So we sprayed off the weeds. We had a bit of a docking problem, and we did that. And then from our soil sample, I knew we needed more phosphate and potash, so we were adding that using manure and slurry. We were aiming to do it in the first year, but the weather beat us because we took a first cut of silage off. And I suppose that's the lesson learned for us and maybe some of you guys listening as well. If I was doing this again, I would probably try to get it done sort of earlier in the year, because really, as the year deteriorated, we ran into problems, and we got the field plowed, but then it ended up lying all winter, which caused us more problems. If you want to change the slide there. So the mix that we chose was the one in front of you. The people on this call may be better educated than I, but the thing that jumped out for me was the Timothy. So we have a mixture of red clover, white clover, and grass, and I knew that Timothy did well in a sort of heavy clay. So that's why we opted for that one. And we've got some pictures later on of how it turned out. So I think it did okay, but that's the mix we went. That's what it looks like there. So yeah, getting the weeds killed and all of that was the biggest issue we had. But with the length of time it was taken to get the preparation done, we were also just having to solve a few problems, like getting someone with a seeder, which, you know, might seem like something small, but when you started asking men had they sowed clover before in the West, there weren't that many. And we would traditionally have sowed our own grass seed with a wagtail. So I didn't really want to start until I knew I would have someone who could establish the crop for me either. So we got that problem overcome. But yeah, it was just a learning curve the whole time. If you want to change the slide there. So I took a few pictures as we went along. You'll see from this field that there's probably a lot of white on it, and that was as a result of the ploughing lying over the winter, which caused the problem in the fact that we would usually power harrow the grass or the ploughing, but because there was so much sort of debris, we got the loan of a set of discs to disc it in, and it worked out well. Something that was new for us as well was, as you probably heard David talking there about preparation of the seed bed. So we would usually roll the grass seed after we sowed the grass seed, but because this needed a firm seed bed, we actually rolled before we put the seeds in, and then we got the guy to come with the seeder, and then we rolled it again. So I'm sure the neighbours thought we had lost our minds, but we just wanted to make sure that the clover wasn't buried. So if you want to change the slide, you can see what it was like about 4 weeks later. So you can see the green just starting to come, and it did just have a light shower of rain the day after we sowed it. And then if you change the slide again, you'll see that's what it was like on the 19th of July. So I don't know if you're like me, you can get a bit blinded with science in terms of all the do's and don'ts and, you know, all the dry matter and all the rest. My own feeling on it was we've always sowed a mix that had clover in it, but we wanted to see what this could do for us, because people talk away about climate change and greenhouse gases, and you can feel very detached from all of that. But when you put it into the sense of we're able to grow silage without having to sow fertiliser on it, and it's saving you money and you're getting the same results. Like we're using that silage to feed cows and to feed calves, and I wouldn't say it's any better than grass, but it's as good as the grass, and we haven't had to sow fertiliser on it. If you want to change the slide there. So I took a picture of it when we were doing it. That's, as I say, that was only sowed in June, and then we were cutting that on the 1st of September, more or less to tidy it up. And you can see by the tracks there, we were just getting away with it because of the weather that we had was just not great. But we basically mowed it and then rode it up the next day and baled it. You're also always trying to avoid the leaf shatter, as I understand it, because it's a very delicate crop. But yeah, any bales that we made have worked out well. The cattle are happy on it. So if you want to change it on the slide there. So again, it's first year. you know, yes, no, it's not 3 cuts of silage, but, you know, we're being totally honest here and showing you everything. I decided to make bales rather than put it in the pit because I wanted to see how it would turn out. And we milk cows in a robot, so I was basically mixing a bale and with the silage into the diet feeder, and we had no drop off in the production of milk. And yeah, lesson learned for the bales. That was the day they were stacked. I wouldn't stack them again because the ones on the bottom suffered a wee bit because it's a wee bit softer. So if you're making bales, try to just stack them on their end and don't go higher than one. I'm not sure if there is another slide, but you can change it there. So we sowed, we got it grazed over the winter. The guy that had the sheep was under strict instructions not to graze it to the squick, so he grazed it, and we've put slurry on there just literally this week. And as you can see by the tracks, we're just getting away. We're putting on 2,000 gallons to the acre with a flow meter. I'm not sure, is there any more slides there? Yeah, that's it. So
no, thank you very much, Frank. That was very, very interesting. Great to see those practical examples. And now I'll hand over to another Tyrone dairy farmer, Andrew Crawford, who farms near Berra. So Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jason. I suppose the two fields that we picked this were located just outside Omagh, between Omagh and Ballygolly. It's approximately 5 miles from Omagh. The fields we put the red clover in the control were, I suppose we picked them because they were due for reseeding anyway. They were traditionally some of our better producing fields, and the fields for the red clover had a pH of 6.3, 6.4, so it was good, correct level of pH for the red clover going in. Looking at our system, we are a bit like Frank, we're dairy farming. We're predominantly autumn calving cows, and it's important that we get high quality grass silage for the winter diet for our cows. So look at the establishment before we picked the fields. They were analysed in terms of the soil, and from that you can see that the P was 2-, pH was 6.3 and 6. We put the red clover into the field where the pH was 6.3, and we used the field at the pH 6 for the control. The year before, in the autumn of 2022, we spread the field off with Forefront, the field that was used for the red clover, and we found it was a good kill, and we got good control over the docks before the 2023 season when we sowed the field out. 2023 was a challenge, as everybody will be aware, in terms of reseeding. It was a bit of a snatch and grab for us, so we carried out a traditional type reseed. We put on farmyard manure, we ploughed it, power harrowed it, lined it, and similar to Frank then, we rolled it prior to sowing out the grass seed. Again, we used a direct drill for sowing out the grass seed to ensure that we didn't bury the red clover seed too late. As I said, it was a bit of a snatch and grab. We sowed out the red clover on the 29th of July, basically after the second cut of silage, but we didn't get the control field sowed out to the 6th of August. And you could really see the difference in terms of the sward growth. That week made a real difference in terms of sward establishment. When we sowed out the grass seed, we did go in with a seedbed fertiliser, both into the red clover and into the control field. It was a 10-10-20 fertiliser used for that. In terms of, we use a germinal grass seed. It was chosen because it was predominantly perennial ryegrass, intermediates and late, and we used the red clover variety of Aberclaret. Now, in terms of the two, and we used a white clover variety of Alice in both fields. It was identical mix going into both fields, with the only difference being 3 kilograms of red clover was sowed out in terms of the red clover field. In terms of management, last year we put on 2,000 gallons to the acre of control onto the control field on March, and we spread 3,000 gallons of slurry to the acre in March onto the red clover field. The control field then got 2.5 bags to the acre of 22,014 on the 13th of April. Our first cut silage went in on the 16th of May. We carried out a 24-hour wilt with the control field and the red clover field. We tedded the control field, but we didn't bother tedding the red clover field, either the first or second cut. I should say that the slurry and all slurry applications that we've used on the red clover has been used with a dribble bar. We didn't put slurry tankers onto the ground because we're afraid of compaction with the red clover. First cut went off on the 16th of May. We went back on then with 1,000 gallons to the acre in the red clover and 3,000 gallons to the acre in the control field. And we put on a further 1.5 bags of 010 onto the control field. Second cut went off in the middle of July, again 24-hour wilt, and this was followed up by 2,500 gallons per acre going on for both fields, and 1.5 bags of 010 on the control field. We carried out the third cut of silage on the 5th of September. Now both of these fields were tedded and lifted on the 7th of September. At the very end of both the year that the grass sward was established and after last year, we grazed the fields in the back end with 1-year-old heifers. Now this was a light grazing. We didn't allow them to graze it too tightly because we didn't want to damage the sward. If we move on to look at the results to date, we can see that looking at the protein, and it's very similar to what David talked about, the protein was slightly less in terms of the red clover compared to control on the first cut, but was better on the second and third cut. There was a higher crude protein in the red clover compared to the control field. If we look at tons of dry matter per hectare, I have to say neither of them were great. On the first cut with 2.6 tons of dry matter per hectare of the red clover and 2.9 tons of the control field. If we look at the second cut with a better tons of dry matter in the red clover with 4.4 tons of dry matter on the red clover compared to 3.8 tons, and on the third cuts with 2.5 tons of grass come off the red clover compared to 1.63 tons of the control. So overall, with a total of 9.45 tons of dry matter produced on the red clover compared to 8.37 tons on the control field. And bearing in mind, we used over 270 kilograms of nitrogen per acre on the control field. So it's roughly 100 pounds per acre were spent on fertiliser, chemical fertiliser for the control, but yet at over a ton of dry matter less per hectare. I have to say the results of both the fields were disappointing, maybe in the total herbage grown, bearing in mind these fields were some of our fairly good, one of our better growing 2 grass fields for growing silage on. Suppose we're looking at the advantages, but if we move on, we found that there was some challenges. In terms of the red clover, we found that the field became patchy, and there was places on the field where the red clover seemed to be killed off, or died out of it. And there were stripes across the field, as you can see in the background. We believe that this was maybe because of the contractor mowed the ground too tight. We're not 100% sure of that. That is one of the challenges. This is very much, when we're cutting silage, you're going in to snatch it with the weather we had last year. And I think in the second cut, there was 5 mowers. There was a triple mower in one of the tractors and double mower in the second. And to get all those mowers set at the right level can be a challenge, particularly when a contractor is busy and relying on staff to get in to carry that out. The second point I would make is both our fields were disappointed on it, and we'll put that down to the potash on the ground. The K levels of the ground was only 1, soil level 1, and we needed to get that up. Now, we did go in with a seedbed fertiliser, and we thought that would have been improved it. That hasn't been the case, so we will be going in now in the next couple of days and mure out of potash to see can we improve the potash level of the soil to improve that. Suppose the third point I would make, it complicates the system as a whole. There's many advantages for red clover, but we find, particularly in a challenging year, you're relying on a contractor to come in to minimize compaction, to make sure he mows at the right height, and that can be a challenge, particularly in bad weather. So there are many things we can learn from it. There are many things we still need to learn from it. It's been a useful project. There are many advantages with it, but there are also some challenges. So maybe Jason, I'll maybe hand back to you to further discussion.
Thank you, Andrew. That's, I mean, I think very interesting and some very practical points you make on the challenges with red clover, which I think everyone needs to bear in mind. Okay, just before we kind of finish up and have our discussion session, our final talk this evening is from David Patterson, who is a forage technologist at Caffrey, and he is going to discuss the establishment of both white and red clover at Greenmount.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Yeah, so for anyone who isn't aware, Caffrey stands for the College of Agriculture, Food and Rural Enterprise, and I am a forage technologist on the Greenmount campus in Antrim. And just as a side note, there's been a bout of sickness going through our house today, so if I disappear off the screen quickly, that's why. Okay, Courtney, next slide. Okay, so this evening, very quickly, I'm conscious of time. I am going to give you a bit of an overview of some of the work regarding clover that is going on the Caffrey Farm estate currently, and over this past number of years. Firstly, I'm going to talk a bit on white clover and what we're doing in terms of stitching. However, I'm conscious I could spend several hours talking about our work on white clover, so I'll keep it to a minimum, a bit of an overview, and I'll be able to signpost you to some more information about that at the end. And then we'll get into what we're here this evening to talk about is our experiences with red clover. So in terms of the strategy on the Caffrey farms over this past number of years, we have an active plan in place to try to get a lot more clover back into our grazing swards, both at the dairy centre, which is home to 180 Holstein autumn calving cows, and also at the lowland beef and sheep farm, which is comprised of 200 lowland ewes, 100 suckler cows, and annually finishes just over 200 animals. And I suppose as way of background, clover is nothing new, especially white clover. And if we go back pre-2000, the swards on the Greenmount farms would have been full of clover. But as has happened with the industry, cheap nitrogen and higher stocking rates, we have got away from clover. So our strategy over this past 2 years has been laid out that we would like to establish all of our grazing swards on the two farms, the dairy centre and the beef and sheep centre, establish white clover in all of the grazing swards over a 4-year process. So 25% being sown annually. Why are we doing this? Well, it's to reduce our reliance on chemical nitrogen, and that has several benefits, as has been mentioned previously this evening. 1, economically for the farmer. 2, in terms of animal performance, so hopefully increased protein, increased palatability and digestibility, resulting in improved animal performance, and also to do with our carbon footprint and environmentally, both from the emissions associated with the production, transport, and the nitrous oxide associated with the spreading of chemical nitrogen fertiliser. But on the back of this, we don't want to sacrifice our production. We want to maintain the stocking levels that we have currently. So we're targeting a 30% clover inclusion. Also, just to add, historically, over this past 10 years, our nitrogen levels, chemical nitrogen application levels on the grazing platform of the dairy centre has been around 250 kilos of N per hectare. We are aiming to get that below 150, so a 100 kilo reduction, but hopefully closer to 100. And on the beef and sheep centre, we're historically sitting around 140 to 145 kilos of N, and we're trying to reduce that down to a maximum of 80. Okay. So some of the key, I'll briefly glance through these slides again in the interest of time, but things we're looking at when we're establishing our clover, so soil temperature, soil moisture, and our timing, specifically the length of daylight hours remaining in the season. So to this end, we're targeting the period from mid-April, the second or third week of April through to the middle of May, and we have found best results in that window. We're looking to minimize weed competition. So obviously at the start of the 4 years, we have plenty of paddocks to choose from. We're now going into year 3, so our selection is a bit less, but again, we're looking to go into clean swards. And then also we're looking at previous fertiliser use in the paddock and grass growth to see which are our biggest wins, first of all, earlier in the programme. And again, soil analysis, nutrient action plans, we need to have that right as well. Okay. The selection process, we're targeting paddocks with soils above 6.3 and minimum P and K indices of 2+. Again, trying to optimize white clover establishment. So we have sort of exhausted the optimum paddocks at this stage, and we've been doing a bit of background work over the first 2 years in terms of getting other paddocks up to speed. So they're ready for the final 2 years. Prevalence of weeds in the existing swards, as David was saying, it's best to get those problems dealt with pre putting clover in the ground. Again, we're pinning a lot of hope on the back of Pro Clover at this stage, but weeds have been an issue so far. Again, history of sprays applied, there will be a latent effect on some of those more harder acting herbicides that might carry over into the next season. We're looking at sward composition. So is there enough perennial ryegrass in that sward that if we get a good head of clover, we're going to be happy keeping that sward there for the next 4, 5, 6 years? And then performance of the existing sward, similar to any reseeding policy, and the amount of nitrogen it's taken to grow that. Okay. So establishment methods, well, there's an awful lot I could speak on in this topic. In the first year in 2023, we tried 3 different methods of overseeding the white clover. We found one to work superior to the other 3. So in 24, we stuck with that. And that method was the iron box. So the springtime harrow, basically with a seed box broadcasting the clover seed on top of the soil. Something we did change in the second year was to scarify the surface of the paddock 2 to 3 times before applying the white clover seed on the final pass, and then rolling that seed in to try and maximize seed to soil contact. And we're sowing white clover 2.5 kilos to the acre broadcast. We split that over 2 white clover varieties, so 1.25 kilos per acre of body, and Aber Herald, just to take out any variation in germination between the 2 varieties. And again, those 2 varieties taken off the recommended lists. Okay. We have also looked at the full sward reseed. The limitations of this are the length of time that these paddocks are out of rotation, especially when we're doing this in the springtime. So again, with a autumn calving dairy herd, we have a big demand for grass in the spring and falls off significantly in the autumn. So it's working really well, but it's a hard drain on the grazing platform. So in this case, there's been no ploughing done on the college farms. We're burning the sward off, going in with discs, shallow cultivation, power harrow to tidy it up, and again surface seeding with the iron box, and again 2.5 kilos of white clover going into that with 3 different varieties of intermediate diploids and tetraploids. Okay. So post-sowing management we've found to be nearly more important than any of the processes before that. You can get a really good germination of white clover seedlings, but if you are not mindful of them throughout the rest of the season, they will very quickly disappear. So we're targeting to keep as much light into the base of these swards and available for the clover as possible. And to that end, we're targeting a shorter rotation length, so right down to 18 days, and also lower pre-grazing covers. just so we're minimizing the amount of time that those clover seedlings are getting shaded out from sunlight. And again, trying to graze down a wee bit tighter. So the total amount of grass we're taking off that paddock is probably about the same. We're just pulling the pre and the post down a wee bit to where they would typically normally be for the farm. No nitrogen is being sowed on application when the seed's applied, and again after the first grazing, there's no nitrogen going on. However, after the second grazing post-sowing, we're going on with a half rate of chemical nitrogen, which is working out around 12 kilos of N to the hectare. In a best case scenario, if you wanted to give the clover the best possible start, you wouldn't put any nitrogen on, but we're in the balancing act that we have a lot of swards on reduced nitrogen, and we still have a herd of cows to feed, so there has to be a trade-off there. And again, trying to get these swards grazed off nice and tight over the winter time. And rightly or wrongly, we have some lovely sheep that come down for our hill farm, and they help in that process. Because if we allow these stolons to get shaded out over the winter time, they'll simply rot and die, and they'll not be there for us the following spring. To achieve our 100 to 150 kilos on the dairy platform, we're still going on with a good full rate of nitrogen in the springtime up until the 1st of May. Basically, because the clover isn't adding much nitrogen to the sward at that stage, we have a big demand in grass, and that allows us to feed the cows and doesn't significantly affect the clover. However, after the 1st of May, going down to our half rates of nitrogen, so 12 kilos to the hectare after each grazing. Okay. So performance, in terms of overseeding, we have mixed reports. In 2023, it came in very dry towards the end of May and into June. And whilst our germination rates were good, clover seedlings didn't survive in many cases in that dry weather. There were 2 overseeding paddocks that did perform very well, and in February 24, we're still looking very well. However, when we got into the main season in 24, into May, June, and assessed them again, there wasn't enough clover still in those swards to sustain a reduced rate of nitrogen. 2024 has been much better for us. Even though our application or establishment was later due to a late turnout and a very wet spring, we got very good germination rates with 2 paddocks being germinated and up within 2 to 3 days of sowing. And on assessment back at the start of February this year, they're looking very promising, and we're very confident we'll be able to pull the nitrogen back significantly on those paddocks. Overseeding is very variable, and it's a tool in the toolbox. I should have said in our 4-year plan, I wouldn't be recommending a 4-year transition for any farm, any commercial farm out there. It's a big commitment. There's a lot of area tied up, and I would be saying on a commercial farm, you're looking at more of a 8 to 9, possibly even 10-year transition. I suppose we're trying to speed this process up for demonstration purposes. The overseeding is a great option if there's potentially a small bit of clover in the sward, 5–10%, to try and boost that clover content up. However, going in from a point of 0 to try to get to 30, it's a tall ask, and results are variable. Okay. So full reseed method, I wanted to add this slide in just to keep everything real. It's not all sunshine and roses, and just because we do it at Greenmount doesn't mean it works. So this was an example of our full sward reseed. This was sown out, sprayed off at the start of May 23, and sown out, as we have heard about the season of 2023 previously from the farmers. It wasn't straightforward. We got these seeds into the ground. That was followed by 3 to 4 weeks of very dry weather, which favoured red shank and the odd thistle. And then once we got into July, when we actually had some grass in the sward to graze, conditions deteriorated, and we got 2 snatch and grab grazings off this paddock. Despite the farm staff's best efforts and going out there at 9 o'clock at night to move the cows onto a different paddock. Trafficability was an issue. This sward was out of the rotation for about 14 weeks. It also lay straight opposite the dairy, or the dairy, and would have been a great nighttime paddock in many other years. So this hurt us, but I will say there's a great head of white clover there now. A really good proportion of white clover. We pulled nitrogen right back to just over 100 kilos on this sward in 2024, and it's working. Okay. So we have doubled a wee bit in autumn reseeds then towards the end of 2024. And as a bit of a look-see, as I said, on the dairy centre, we have a huge grazing demand in spring, and we start drying cows off towards the end of July. So our grazing demand drops off a cliff really at the start of September. So how do we utilise that better? How do we make this work for that system? Well, we looked at the autumn reseed. Again, we're going into the third year of this, and I suppose most of the nice open swards that we would have looked to overseed, we have targeted them, and a lot of the swards we have now left, which we haven't tackled yet, are quite dense, thick thick bases on those swards. So the idea of the autumn reseed was to get a nice crop of grass established in the autumn, and we would have a nice open sward to stitch into in spring 25. The two photos on the left were taken on the 2nd of October in 24. So the paddock on the very left of your screen was established on the 10th of September, and the second one over here was established on the 20th of September. From those dates, I personally thought this clover isn't going to stand a chance, but we put the white clover in anyway to see what it did, and the total cost of the reseed, it wasn't a big addition. So again, these were minimum cultivation reseeds, sprayed off for about a fortnight, disked, power harrowed, broadcast the seed, and then rolled in. Now, the two photos on the right were taken on the 20th of February. So as you can see in the far right, a very nice sward of grass, and in the second photo from the right, we can see nice white clover seedlings down in the base of that sward. So potentially due to the kinder weather conditions we've had over this past winter, it's maybe a bit of a fluke, but this sward has since been grazed to try and get more light into the base there, and we're fairly confident at this stage we're not going to have to stitch in more white clover into this sward. We're going to see how it goes this year. Okay. So briefly, key challenges: overseeding versus cultivation. Cultivation is belt and braces. It's taking more of your grazing area out per year in terms of the weeks they're out of the grazing rotation. But any full cultivation we have done, we have seen great clover swards as a result. Overseeding is a tool in the toolkit, and it definitely has a place. Selection criteria for the paddocks: sowing timing, post-sowing grazings, nitrogen application rates, weed control. Bloat for us so far hasn't been an issue. We haven't had a big enough proportion of the swards with a high clover content, I wouldn't think. However, as we go into this year, with over 50% of the platforms on reduced nitrogen and high clover, it is something we're going to have to look at a bit more carefully. And just a point there on farm demand, again, we wouldn't be recommending a 4-year transition for any commercial farm. It has had an effect on our silage stocks. On the areas of second and third cut silage we've been able to take, we're having to walk cows slightly further during the grazing season than in previous years. But again, on a commercial farm basis, 7, 8, 9 years would be advisable. Just before I leave the white clover, I'll just put a shameful plug in here that CAFRE are hoping to host a clover awareness event, hopefully on the Tuesday the 3rd of June this year at the Beef and Sheep Centre, where there will be a lot more information and details on the successes and the downfalls that we have found across this journey so far. There'll be a few demonstrations, and there'll be a great opportunity to see this in the flesh and ask plenty of questions. Okay, so red clover, quickly, I'll not spend too long on this, but as well as the white clover, we have looked at our red clover swards as well for silage production. So there was a 4-acre field sown in May 2023, similar to the timings of the farmers involved in the ZeroNsile project. This was on CAFRE's Beef and Sheep Lowland Centre. First cut silage was taken off this 4-acre field. at the start of May. It was burned off or desiccated 5 days before the silage was harvested, and that was able to cut down our interval then, being able to get in and establish the new sward. Again, no ploughing, minimum cultivation with discs, followed by the power harrow, and then broadcasted the seed. Our seed mix was slightly different to the farmers we've heard from this evening. Again, we went with the Aber Claret red clover, which seems to be top of the tree. We only went with 3 kilos of it, and we went with 10 kilos of perennial ryegrass. Only 2 varieties, an intermediate diploid and an intermediate haploid. But similarly, we went with white clover as well. So we actually put 2 kilos of white clover in there, split between 2 varieties, Alice and Aber Swan. 2023, as a bit of an overview, didn't go too well. Again, we got hit with that dry spell, and we eventually were able to cut a crop of bales off the red clover sward on towards the end of August. This consisted of 4 bales to the acre, which I would guesstimate were 60 to 70% red shank, and had a dry matter of 16%. So similar values to farmyard manure potentially. But while saying that, the cows did eat them and seemed to do quite well on them. 2024 was a much brighter picture. So we got on early at the start of February with our first application of slurry, and this field received only slurry in 2024. So 3 applications of 2,000 gallons of strong cattle slurry, which when we take the analysis of the slurry, provided us across the season with 30 kilos of nitrogen to the hectare, 34 kilos of P to the hectare, and 250 kilos of K to the hectare. So we're not too far away from our total crop requirement at all. So no chemical fertiliser, neither nitrogen, phosphate or potash. We targeted our 36-hour wilting, but similar to the farmers, a lot of cases that wasn't possible, and 2 of our cuts were 24-hour wilts. We did go in with a tedder straight after mowing as well. So you can see the cut dates there for the 3 cuts in 2024 and the yield of bales per acre, which we were fairly happy with, as well as the dry matters. Okay. So here we have the silage qualities for the 3 cuts taken this year. And I would say I'm not overly impressed with the silage qualities, but as I'm about to say, I think the performance suggests the quality was a lot higher than the results we're coming back at. So I'll also stress before I go over these results that this is not a scientific study. This is a farm level comparison, and these results are not statistically robust. But 22 dairy bred beef bullocks were randomly split into 2 groups of 11. These were predominantly blues with some Angus and some Holstein out of Holstein cows. All animals, all 22, were fed 6 kilos of concentrate, whilst 11 were fed ad lib red clover silage bales, and the other 11 were fed ad lib first cut silage from the pit. Across the finishing period, which ended just 10 days ago with the final animals being sent to the factory, the 11 on the red clover silage averaged 1.2 kilos of live weight per day, and the animals on the first cut silo silage averaged 0.8 kilos per head per day, so a 0.4 kilo improvement a day for the red clover silage group. So what are our plans going forward with red clover? That red clover sward was grazed with lambs on the 3rd week of October in 2024, which they seem to do very well on as well. That field has now been slurried on the 13th of February this year, again with 2,000 gallons. So the plan is to repeat the process for the next 1, 2, 3 years, however long the red clover persists, really. And then furthermore, we have some potential plans in place to incorporate more red clover silage swards across the Caffrey farms, particularly on the dairy centre, fields which are away from the grazing platform, which are solely cut for silage. And we see this as a great opportunity to try and reduce our chemical nitrogen use further. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that interesting talk on the experiences you've had. So if I can ask David, Francis, and Andrew to turn on their cameras again for a short question and answer session. I'm just noticing, I know, I see, David, you've been answering a few questions, and I think a point of debate that seems to be here, I just want to pick up on something that Andrew said during his talk, was the mower height. So obviously, you know, David, what is the ideal mower height? And any thoughts then on, you said only TED once, if you are going to TED, but what about conditioners? There's some discussion around the use of conditioners. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm no machinery specialist, but if the bruising and the conditioning can be turned back a bit, and from a cutting height point of view, if the if you could achieve 4 to 5 centimeters consistently across the field, no scalping, I think that'd be okay. Some people would go a bit further and advise, you know, cutting height up at 7 to 8 centimeters. I'm not so sure that's absolutely necessary, but back to the same point, just avoid scalping. Now, I know that's down to having level ground in the first place and not rushing the mowing operation. Andrew's point was very well made with the multi-mowers, you know, ganged up around tractors these days. How on earth can you keep that consistent mowing height? It's a challenge. But look, the point is, the red clover growing point is right at the top of the ground surface there, so it's not protected in any way. So you just have to be mindful of that in whatever combination of mechanical operations you do. And for the tedding, I think you have to get in, you're almost trailing around behind the mower in the field. As soon as he's finished, you're in there, and try to ted out gently. You know, you can slow rotor speeds down. Ted it out gently just to get maximum wilt from the sunshine. And then again, raking, if that can be not done at breakneck speed, driving around the field as well.
Okay. I see another, obviously in the questions you've answered already, David, there, some discussion on, you know, obviously grazing out versus and the risk of shading. I know, Frank, you said you grazed out with some sheep. Andrew, what did you do in terms of kind of end of season management, or what kind of covers have you carried over the winter? Did you graze with sheep or any other stock just to avoid a head cover?
Both years we grazed it out with dairy replacement heifers, year-old dairy replacement heifers. Now they went on to it, they went over 20 acres and were only on to it a week and quickly off it again, so they didn't graze it tightly down, but we just removed the surplus cover with heifers.
Yep, that's very interesting. David, any just thoughts on just obviously that the risk of shading? At what point could that be a concern in terms of overwintered covers?
Yeah, ideally it would be, it's too late now for the folks asking those questions, but ideally it would be before the turn of the year, when that, you know, graze out should have happened. It could still happen now, but it will have the knock-on effect of delaying first cut, and maybe even more importantly, if you do go on now to graze off what seems to be a too high a cover, and concern there would be, you know, the grass shading out the clover too much. It needs to be a fast graze. Otherwise, again, you could be trampling too much. And the concern is if it's a prolonged graze more than a week, 10 days or so, you could be the stock, if it's sheep or heifers or calves or whatever, they could actually end up regrazing the regrowing grazed off plants. That'll hurt both the grass and the clover. So ideal world before the turn of the year. If you have to do it now, do it fast.
Okay, David. I see a question here just come in about the analysis of grass silage. So I suppose a point to note, and David, you can comment, that we used wet chemistry on our results because yes, I think traditional NIRS is not particularly reliable. We don't have the calibration equations. But David, do you want to say anything around that?
Yeah, the calibration equations that were thoroughly well derived were largely based on grass only. I think they're just about okay for grass, white clover with relatively low amount of clover in the silage. But once you get into our red clover dominant type silage, the NAIRS predictions aren't. They just aren't designed for that. It would take a lot of data to recalibrate those. So just to make that point, the results that I was showing and the results that we will continue to analyze in the ZeroNsile project are based on wet chemistry, just to try and get back to basics, what exact levels of crude protein, total energy, et cetera, that's in the crop. And I think Robert was suggesting it as well. The performance is, if you were just to do NAIRS analysis on red clover type silages, it might not be as good a prediction, first of all. But even if the red clover silage is slightly lower in terms of actual energy level and so on and so forth, the intakes generally are higher. That's what was coming through from a lot of different research. The intakes are higher, and the nutrient protected as it goes through the rumen is slightly higher as well. So there's two effects there that are helping what might seem to be a lower energy value crop.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Robert, then a question for you here. And obviously you can comment also on that analysis too, because I think your own experience was it you know, as the saying goes, it feeds better than it reads. But I see a question here from Robert Kennedy. Can white clover be stitched in behind the cows in May and June?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's how the bulk of our clover stitching has been done. So we have been targeting for the end of April, sorry, into May. Our results in June have been fairly poor because soil moisture has decreased over this past number of years during that period. But yes, that's exactly how we do it. We try to get in with the white clover seed as soon as possible after grazing. So ideally, if the cows come out that morning, we're sowing that paddock that day. And in some cases, we have taken a cut of bales off the paddock the day before as well. You're trying to get the white clover the best possible start as possible, and that means as little competition from grass as possible. So if you're going in a week after it's been grazed, you're getting off to a bad start for those seedlings to start with. And then again, that's where the shorter grazing rotations come in after to try and reduce that competition.
Okay, a couple of questions here, and I don't know, David, Robert, which one you want to take them. There's one here on any recommendations for applying dung instead of slurry, and also one around, is there any issues if you wanted to graze red clover with dairy cows, given that obviously that was referring to some of the work that had been done on sheep many years ago, on the high estrogen levels affecting fertility? I mean, David, I'm well aware Solihead have grazed red clover joggis without any perceived effects.
Yeah, talking to James Humphreys at Solihead, they haven't had a problem, and they have had high content red clover mixed swards there for sure. But I think the research was largely more a problem with younger animals, perhaps calves, perhaps lambs, but not so much mature dairy cows.
Okay. And then I'll take this as the last question here. Some of the fields from the trials of red clover were at pH of 6.3. Would you be better to lime again? And if so, can you produce a high pH which is above optimal? So, you know, would you at 6.3, would you lime again, David? And then is there an upper limit where you start to run into other problems?
That's a really good question. I don't have a really good answer, but I think at 6.3, you're in the right ballpark. You know, that's very good. Some people might have taken a chance historically with a pH of 6, thinking they've done very well. 6.5 might be a target, but 6.3, it's so close. I think you could go with that. As to an upper limit, You know, I'd have to think about that, but I think you'd have to be well beyond 7 before you'd start to run into any individual nutrient problems of stuff certain nutrients getting bound up or becoming toxic.
Okay. All right. Now listen, I'm going to I'll take one last one there. Any recommendations on silage additive when harvesting red clover swords? David or Robert, any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I got distracted with the questions. What could you repeat the questions?
Sorry, any recommendation? Would you recommend applying an additive on red clover silage swords?
Yes, short answer. Especially a couple of things. You've seen from our results already there, first cut in particular. I already expected it in third cut, but first cut as well is showing to be the standing crop is much lower in dry matter. So that's a problem for making silage. And as well as that, any analyses I've seen historically of red clover swards, pre-cutting, pre-ensiling, very high buffering capacity. So, and the good old principle of getting a rapid pH fall as quickly as possible down to 4 or so, the additive would be a good built-in brace, as I would have suggested.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, we're fastly moving on time, so I'm going to draw this to a close. Can I thank David, Francis, Andrew, and Robert for their invaluable contribution tonight? And I'd also like to thank all the farmers we have involved in our ZeroNsile project. We do in AgriSearch rely on a lot of farmers for a lot of our projects. We really couldn't do it without them. And thank them for all their work throughout this. Just going on to some future events, if you go on to the next slide, we will be holding a red clover farm walks in early June, and Robert also said that there's the Caffrey Clover Farm Walk on the 3rd of June, so details will be in the farming press on social media. If you visit the AgriSearch website, you can also sign up for our regular email bulletins. Also a reminder that GrassCheck will be starting again on the week beginning 17th of March. In addition to the weekly bulletin, we also produce a more detailed email bulletin on every Thursday. This year, we're going to introduce some new features to that email bulletin, including county level grass growth and current end response rate, fertiliser response rates. So again, if you go to the GrassCheck section of the AgriSearch website, you'll find a place you can sign up for those bulletins. Also, I'm pleased to announce tonight that we will be holding a major dairy conference targeted at high input dairy systems. This will be held on the 15th of April in Armagh City Hotel. And if you go on to the next slide, Courtney, you will see that we have an excellent lineup of speakers, including 3 dairy farmers. We have Conor Casey and Claire Beckett from Northern Ireland and Keith Gu from Huddleston Farms in West Sussex. In addition, we have Niall O'Boyle, a vet who hails from Randallstown, with a lot of experience in high-yielding herds, both in the United States and in the UK. And Peter Bone, who is a leading expert and consultant in the mineral nutrition of livestock. Registration will open up towards the end of the week. So again, keep an eye on the AgriSearch website and social media for that. Moving on, AgriSearch has just opened a recruitment for 20 farmers to take part in a major new DEFRA-funded project called the UK Dairy Carbon Network. This will bring together 56 farmers from right across the UK to explore and implement practical solutions for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Applications are now open and will close on the 31st of March. We're holding an information webinar on the 18th of March for interested farmers. And again, further information can be found on our website. And finally, can I remind you to please fill in the feedback survey, which will come up at the end of the webinar. This helps us plan our future events and is very valuable. So thank you all very much for attending tonight, and I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.